It's my distinct honor for our next speaker to introduce her. Her name's Dr. Lisa Boyette, and she is CEO of Curable. You know, Dr. Boyette is a really personal and intimate view of autoimmune liver disease, and part of the reason I thought it was so important for her to come and talk and really tell you what she does. She's going to speak more about her founding role in this research accelerator that really applies engineering approaches to medical problems, and specifically related to AIH. She is world-renowned in primary sclerosing cholangitis, and we want to think about how her approach can apply to our disease. So if you'll join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Boyette.
Thank you.
Forward, back, and pointer.
Okay, perfect. All right, is this on? Can you all hear me? Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here. I just want to take a moment for those of you who are new to autoimmune hepatitis and really emphasize what a unique organization this is. For those of you who've had autoimmune hepatitis for a long time, you know that prior to the founding of this organization, you didn't have this kind of support. And I would just really encourage us all to give Dr. Lammert a round of applause for physician-led efforts. Physician-led efforts like this are really unusual. So wonderful organization you have access to. And I'm thrilled to be here to tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing in autoimmune liver disease generally. We're starting to branch out into new areas of autoimmunity now. But our start was in primary sclerosing cholangitis. Just quick show of hands, anyone in the audience overlap primary sclerosing cholangitis, autoimmune hepatitis? Okay, a couple. So I run an organization that's a research accelerator, and I'll tell you as we go a little bit more about what that means. But we are putting together large-scale research efforts to try to bring findings to patients in a way that impacts their health in real time. And by real time, I mean 5 years, not 50 years. So that's the overall idea. We'll talk about how those studies can be planned and launched around unmet patient needs. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the pathway from diagnosis to treatments, cures, and then ultimately preventing these kinds of diseases. A second kind of pipeline we're going to envision is about discovery, and by that I mean laboratory research, all the way to delivery of healthcare. So that's kind of a different continuum that we think about where there are unmet patient needs. And then I want to talk to you very briefly about how you all can plug in and help us accelerate that process. And then I think at the end there will be some time for questions after this session is concluded. So this is that diagnosis to treatment to cure to ultimately prevention progression that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And the reason I started thinking about this specifically within autoimmune liver disease is because one of my siblings has both autoimmune hepatitis and primary sclerosing cholangitis. He also has inflammatory bowel disease. So if anybody wants to talk about IBD, we can also talk about that later. I'll be around the rest of the weekend too if any of you want to have private conversations. But if you think about a patient who's diagnosed with one of these diseases, they have this time zero where they start getting sick, go in and get a diagnosis, and then there are all these horrible things that happen to them until they eventually, in the case of PSC, get a liver transplant, and sometimes that happens for autoimmune hepatitis. And then, some people have to do that whole process all over again. What we would love to see happen in the long term is that this is not, a linear progression, that we can turn this data-wise into a cycle where everything we're learning from patients as they progress down this road goes into developing early screening tools and ultimately prevention tools for these kinds of diseases. But that means it's really important to capture data from patients as they're progressing down this pathway so that we can get better at how we're practicing medicine in this area. So that's one pipeline to keep in mind. Another pipeline to keep in mind is how we do research and then take the information that we get from doing research and turn it into new therapies within biomedical research. So we've got all these people out there at academic medical centers like IU, across the country, around the world, doing basic research in the laboratory, learning all kinds of things about autoimmune liver disease. And mostly that work is funded by the government or by large foundations. But it can take decades to see those findings kind of percolate through the system and get out into the literature. And then at the other end of that pipeline, we have pharmaceutical companies who are taking what's known from the literature and using that to make better and better treatments for these kinds of diseases. That process, because of the regulatory piece of it, can also take decades, but also a lot of behind closed doors development work that pharma companies do. And this is a for-profit industry. How we get things from this end to this end is called translational research. And there are some people, like your clinician researchers at large academic medical centers, who focus on this with part of their time. But we've taken this really challenging piece of how do we get basic lab findings and turn them into new therapies, and we've kind of made it a hobby. We're going to take these really busy doctors who also run laboratories and ask them to do this really hard work. We're not really sure how to pay for it or whose responsibility it is. And so that also ends up taking decades because we just kind of rely on this random bumping into each other and serendipitous events to make that move forward. So this was one area where we looked at this and said, hey, I bet we could really speed up this process if we kind of took charge of this no man's land in the middle here. So that's why we formed this research accelerator. And really it's our goal at Curable to work with all the people already doing great basic research and work with the people who already have tremendous expertise and resources for drug development and help get the whole thing put together in a timely fashion. So what we layered on top of that pipeline is what we call a multidisciplinary intelligence engine, which is a real fancy way of saying we got a bunch of smart people who are trained in different areas on one team, and they go out and interface with all these other smart people doing all these other things that need to be done, and they figure out how to do this iterative cycle more quickly. So we set a goal for ourselves in primary sclerosing and cholangitis of having new meaningful therapies, meaning they extend lifespan and they improve quality of life for PSC patients in phase 2 clinical trials within 5 years of our start date. So if you think about how long it takes to bring a drug to market, you're talking 20 or 30 years, you're talking billions of dollars. 5 years is very ambitious. The thing is, we're not actually doing the work. We're not doing the basic research. We're not making the drugs. We're just getting everyone else to do their job a little more quickly by breaking down barriers and connecting people to each other. And primarily, we fund that kind of work with philanthropy. So that's why it's very important to have engagement, not only from patient communities, but from our citizenry in general, because this is the way medicine needs to move. We all talk about precision medicine. We talk about advances in healthcare, but the reality is we have a lot of opportunities that we've not yet capitalized on. So that piece in the middle, let me just go back real quickly. So, this is a great place for patients to plug in. Sign up for clinical studies once they're available to participate in. And those of you who are here are the types of patients who are doing that already. Another place you can plug in is, tell your friends, neighbors, your community philanthropists that this kind of thing is important to you, if it is in fact important to you. And then my team's piece of all of this is putting together the planning for how this is going to happen. And this is kind of like that really complicated slide we saw earlier about options for treating autoimmune hepatitis that's not responsive to first-line therapy. It's really complicated, right? Each of these blocks that you're kind of seeing here is a multi-million-dollar project. We're somewhere in this middle zone here, years 2 to 3. But I just wanted to share this with you because this is a great illustration of how understanding more about what causes disease through better science is very carefully tied in our plan with clinical development, better therapies and better diagnostics for patients. And the end goal is to have those new therapies in trials, but we can't do that without great diagnostic technology, without new biomarkers so that we can measure whether therapies are working. And we can't do it without understanding what kind of targets we should be hitting as we're developing those drugs. So it really does take everyone from these different industries working together to make this stuff happen in a timely fashion. And then this is that discovery to delivery continuum that I mentioned to you again, but I just want to reiterate for this pipeline too, we'd like to see this become a cycle so that we're taking observations about what's happening with people when they're getting sick, using that to learn more about the disease and make better drugs, testing those drugs in clinical trials, but then from those trials, looking at how people will respond to therapy and feeding that back into what we understand about the disease. So that it isn't just, oh, we test a drug, it worked or it didn't work, we move on to the next drug. It's how are we using every clinical trial to really maximize what we're learning about diseases like autoimmune hepatitis. And it takes careful planning to kind of build that into trials from the beginning. So I just want to highlight a couple studies for you that we have going on to give you some concrete examples of what this looks like. One study, and the patients are all being recruited from here, from Indianapolis University School of Medicine. It's in collaboration with the Digestive Institute at the National Institutes of Health. It's called the Unravel PSC study, and this study is looking at patients who have both primary sclerosing cholangitis and inflammatory bowel disease. They are going to get biopsied, these poor people, from basically the top of their GI tract to the bottom. They're going to get a bone marrow biopsy. They're going to get a liver biopsy. They're going to get all kinds of blood samples taken. They'll spend a week in the hospital. And then at the end of that, we're going to run every kind of next-generation sequencing technology that we have at our disposal now on all of those samples. And then we have some very talented biostatisticians who are going to build new algorithm-driven approaches for understanding what all that data means about what causes these autoimmune digestive and liver diseases. You know, we talk about microbiome, we talk about the immune system, we talk about genetics, but we don't have a great way of understanding how those things fit together. And in the absence of good animal models that really recapitulate the full picture of human disease, the only way we can learn is to go straight to human patients and really study them in a very comprehensive way. So this is kind of a groundbreaking study. Nothing like this has ever really been done before. And if any of you are being seen here at IU, you may have the opportunity to enroll in this study in the future if you have PSC. And the goal with that study, like I said, is to understand what's causing the disease, both so that we can identify targets and have really nice targeted therapies coming out of that in the future, but also so that instead of just knowing that an airplane has a whole bunch of parts to it, you know, how do those parts fit together in systems, and where are all the spots those systems are likely to break down? Because once we have that systematic understanding, then we have some shot at preventing these kinds of diseases in the future. You know, if you need the right genetic background and a certain chemical exposure or a certain environmental insult, as in the case of celiac disease, can we understand enough about the disease to just eliminate one of those variables and prevent onset of the disease? This I just want to mention real quickly because I think one thing that you all talk some about, and it's really important, is the critical importance of coordinating our efforts in rare disease. You know, rare disease people are spread out geographically. They sometimes are cared for in the community, and as Dr. Lambert mentioned, don't have access to large medical centers like this one. So one of the tools that we've been working to build for PSC, but we will slide it over to autoimmune hepatitis at some point in the future, is a nationwide clinical research network that enables us to do all kinds of things for patients, you know, that feed back to helping patients understand more about their disease, for clinical researchers and drug developers that eventually make medical research less expensive and that enable us to really have that very finely tuned science that enables us to prevent disease in the future. And then this is one other example I want to highlight for you of the kinds of projects that can come together when we're all coordinating our efforts and really working towards the same goals. So we put together a collaborative effort with Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. This launched last year. There are several academic centers participating in this. There's a big group of samples coming from Mayo Clinic, but IU has actually enrolled patients in Mayo's cohort. So several European centers are contributing as well. We'll actually be doing whole exome sequencing, so sequencing all of the coding regions of these patients' genomes for 10,000 unique PSC patients. And there will be some control arms in that study. One of them is an autoimmune hepatitis arm because of the overlap we see with PSC. And we anticipate that this study will conclusively answer questions about how much of a role genetics are playing in autoimmune liver disease. So really excited about this. We should have the first round of data coming out at the end of this summer. So this is happening in real time. You know, and is really an example where we had a nonprofit organization come together with a big pharmaceutical company and academic medical centers, and none of those groups could have done something like this on their own. So I'll stop there. Like I said, I really just wanted to give you kind of a flavor for the types of things that we do, but we would love to hear from you. If you want to participate in research studies, please visit our website. Feel free to email or call us. And again, thanks to Dr. Lammer, and I know Dr. Chalasani is very supportive overall of these kinds of activities. And thanks to all of you, because like I said, I get the feeling you all are the ones who actually enroll in research studies, and that's so important for learning more and not only developing new therapies for you, but for someone in my own family. So this is very important to me too. So thanks for being here.